The Age of Segregation lasted over a century after the Civil War, and while most of the names seen on grounds come from before this era, there are a few figures whose legacies during segregation are questionable, to say the least. In particular, names like Curry, McIntire, Darden, and Hereford have stirred controversy in recent years. While some of these men's legacies are straightforward, others are more complicated. Some figures even contradicted themselves as time went on, making it difficult to decisively say what their legacy even is. But since their names are part of our everyday landscape, it's worth exploring who these men were and the legacies they left behind.
The most straightforward legacy belongs to Jabez Curry. His name has been on the School of Education since 1905, when John Rockefeller donated the money to start the school and stipulated that Curry's name be on it.
Rockefeller presumably chose that name because Curry spent most of his life advocating for universal education throughout the South. But Curry also openly advocated for white supremacy.
Before the Civil War, Curry owned dozens of enslaved workers, and as a congressman, he argued that slavery was beneficial to those who were enslaved. He went on to serve in the Confederate Army and the Confederate House of Representatives. After the war, he became known for his education advocacy, and many in the 19th century commended him for pushing for black education. But he openly argued for separate and unequal education, believing black people should only learn manual and vocational labor.
Curry also has no direct connection to the University of Virginia, and earlier this year, President Ryan said he supported renaming the school. Meanwhile, Paul McIntire's legacy isn't based on what he did, but on his numerous donations to UVA in the early 20th century.
Throughout his life, McIntire donated more than $750,000 to the university. In today's money, that would be about $14 million. The funding went towards establishing departments for commerce and fine arts, building the amphitheater and a hospital wing, as well as general funding for research and events.
However, McIntire's legacy is complicated by the donations he made to the larger Charlottesville community.
He financed Charlottesville statues for George Rogers Clark, Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, and Lewis and Clark, all of which have come under intense scrutiny in recent years. In 1919, McIntire financed Charlottesville's first public library, which was open only to white residents. And in 1926, McIntire donated land for two separate, segregated parks. McIntire Park was reserved for white residents and stretched 92 acres, while Washington Park, which was for black residents, was a mere 9 acres.
As a result, McIntire's legacy has come under question both at UVA and in the broader Charlottesville community. There are also a few UVA presidents whose legacies have been questioned in recent years.
Colgate Darden was president of UVA from 1947 to 1959, after serving as a congressman and as governor of Virginia.
His name has become controversial because of his stances on segregation, an issue on which he contradicted himself many times.
As governor, he enacted laws that helped to desegregate juries in Virginia, while also continuing to bar black students from Virginia medical schools. And later, in one of the companion cases to Brown v. Board of Education, Darden testified in favor of separate but equal. But after the Supreme Court struck that down, Darden broke with the governor bird and openly advocated against Virginia's massive resistance policy, and instead supported integration.
To be sure, Darden's record is mixed at best. He was never known as an agent of social change, and more often than not, he supported the status quo, something which President Hereford would be criticized for 30 years later. Almost immediately after becoming president in 1974, Frank Hereford was mired in controversy.
In 1975, he reportedly skipped a student council forum on minority affairs and lied about why he couldn't be there, leading to hundreds of students protesting on Carr's Hill. Hereford was also one of over 100 faculty members that belonged to the Farmington Country Club, which had a whites-only policy at the time. Students called on Hereford to leave the club, but he refused to do so until 1976 when the club voted to maintain its racist policy. In an effort to course correct, Hereford then established the Office of African American Affairs. That same year, Hereford considered removing an RA who was president of the Gay Student Union. As a result, the student was forced to leave the GSU in order to remain an RA. And while all of this was happening, Hereford established a media board at UVA in an effort to censor student journalists who were reporting on these controversies.
The question the Board of Visitors will have to answer is if these men's legacies are truly reflective of the university's current mission. It's clear that the answer isn't always straightforward, but regardless, it's still a question worth answering if the university wants grounds to reflect its values.